It is so echoey in here. Can we do something that I really enjoy doing? Can I take a picture of this entire audience and send it out on Twitter to President Brown? Stand up. It's been a long, I know you just were standing up. A long 2 hours. Give it a stand up. And stretch one arm up over your head. And then make a fist or make a peace sign. No lewd gestures. We're in church. And we're going to send, this is Lee Zishy. She's the grassroots coordinator for Gasland. She's going to take the photo and we're going to send it out on Twitter. I'm going to get in there with you. Is this good? Do we need people scrunching a little bit or what?
Yeah, maybe if you're on the edge.
If you're on the edge, just pile it a little bit. Yeah. All right, awesome.
And we're going to take two.
We're taking two.
So make sure you keep those hands up there. It takes a little work to be an activist. Okay. All right. Ready? 1, 2, 3. And then one of them goes so we can speed it out. 1, 2, 3. Fantastic.
Thank you. Here's the instructions for that photo.
So we've been taking these photos all across the country and actually all across the world now because we were touring in Europe. So we're going to tweet this out. Our handle is GASLAND II. So please, if you're on Twitter, retweet that out. We want to get this message out there, repeat it as many times as possible. So again, our handle is GASLAND II. We'll tweet, we're from Ohio, not from Gasland. And also when you get a chance, also check out our website. It's Gasland the Movie. So the Twitter handle is Gasland Movie, and the website is Gasland the Movie. You can sign up for our updates on Gasland the Movie. A lot of the stories in this film are still going on, so we update people about that. We let you know what groups all across the world are doing. There's also a chance to donate. We're going to pass the hat around to donate to the groups that made this possible. But our touring, when we go from city to city, HBO doesn't pay for that. They pay for the movie, but for us to do grassroots touring, that's all, thanks to people like you. So you can make a donation on our website as well. So Gasland the Movie, that's our website, and our Twitter handle is Gasland Movie. So thanks.
Thank you, Lee. All right. Well, I'm really happy to be here. I don't know how many of you know this, but I actually spent 2 years at Blvd College. I accelerated 2-year program where you go for 2 years and then you run out of money. So I have real deep relationship to Rain County, to Illyria, where I was teaching actually in the summer at the Illyria High School, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly. And to Mom's Diner in Illyria, if I can go there. But so it's great to be in Ohio. Last time I was here was in Columbus with Bill McKibben at 350.org, where we took over the State House with 1,000 people from all across the country and held citizen testimony, and it was a remarkable event. There were amazing people there. This film premiered on HBO July 8th. Of this year, so it's still pretty new, and it was the top-rated documentary all summer on HBO, so millions of people saw it. The first film was a film that I made, kind of basically out of the backseat of my car, and for very little money. That film was picked up by HBO at Sundance, was nominated for an Oscar, and now it's been seen by about 50 million people in 30 countries. But the more important thing to me, or the most important thing to me in doing this, is not just having this massive television exposure, but actually being places. I've toured to 250 cities with the first movie, and now about 45 with GASLAND II to hold meetings like this and talk. Thanks so much to Food and Water Watch. It's an amazing, brilliant job. To discuss what's going on here and now in this community, and to give an opportunity to ask questions and just to also facilitate a conversation between you guys, because that's the most important thing. So I'm just really happy that this is going on. We're in Detroit last night, tomorrow at the Power Shift conference in Pittsburgh. And I always love it when people from Pittsburgh are here because they always do something like, ow! And then to the Environmental Media Association Awards in Los Angeles for the global crackdown on the 19th, where we are nominated for Best Documentary. Think about us on the 19th. Go to your global crackdown event. If you're not signed up for one, sign up for one. I'm sure you can do that tonight. But let's just take some questions and talk about what's happening. There is a microphone. Go on ahead. Anybody have a question? There's a question in the several questions. I mean, I'm just, this is an amazing church. All the denominations represented on the wall here.
At that hearing, you weren't allowed to testify.
You think say that again? Sir, you started I didn't hear you.
With that hearing, that congressional hearing, they wouldn't let you in. They wouldn't let you there. Wasn't that right? So only pro people, fracking people got to testify. Didn't they come out in Congress and say, oh, yeah, fracking's okay?
Yeah. Well, the way it works in the House and the Senate is whatever party's in control of the House gets to pick the witnesses. So usually what will happen is there's 5 witnesses testifying and it's 4-to-1. So you have 4 people that the industry wants there and 1 person who is considered opposition, and they'll try to pick the weakest possible person to be there. I didn't even get that far into the hearing. What I knew was that this was a hearing that explicitly was going to attack EPA science. And this was a science committee hearing. So we thought, all right, we're making this film about government influence all over, or rather oil and gas influence all over our government. This is the perfect example of what we think is going to happen. We need to be there. We followed this case in Wyoming for 5 years. You know? So we have to be in this hearing. And when they kept denying us, no, you can't come in, no, you can't come in, no, you can't come in, it was my opinion that the only reason why the congressional hearings should not be open to a certain person in the press was if the room was too full for them to be able to conduct their business, which is one of the things that Brad Miller, a Democrat on the panel, did say. He said, we should have reporters in here as many as possible until we're too full to conduct our business, and then we'll move to a bigger room. So we knew that they were censoring us because of the work that we were doing. They knew exactly who we were, and kept shutting us down. We hired accredited media, they found out that those people were hired by us, they kicked them out. So for me it was, all right, either you're going to stand here and let me do this, or you're going to have to take me out. So it was very clear from our perspective as film producers, journalists, that this was deliberate, that this was a violation of First Amendment rights, and that it couldn't stand. That we would either go in there or basically be denied our First Amendment rights and concede. So the way the hearings worked, and sure enough, the minute they arrested me and took me out, the chairman of the committee, Republican Andy Harris of Maryland, attacked the EPA. And he went on a 10-minute introduction just attacking this incredibly meticulous scientific investigation that had gone on for 3.5 years in defense of John Fenton, Lewis Meeks, Jeff Walker, and the other people who did. So it's normal business for the political parties, whichever one is in charge, to skew that panel, and that is what happened on that day. Okay, how do I even pick? All right, there you go.
Tell us more about a natural gas well. I mean, there's a metal casing, and then the cement, what, like a 1-inch layer of cement is poured around it?
Sure.
I mean, and I know these go 5,000 to 7,000 feet down. How do they leak? 5% of them leak. Brand new wells. I mean, can you explain
Talk a little bit
what a
about
well is actually like?
This film is much more about the contamination happening in our chemical system. The first film is more about the contamination and all these particulars of gas wells, although it doesn't go into this issue particularly. The way this was described to me is really quite simple, by Tony and Greg. You can always tell the most genius, brilliant professor by how simply they can explain something. So a gas well is basically a straw in the ground surrounded by cement. You have to open up a hole that's, let's say, 8 inches right? And if the pipe is 7 inches, there's a gap of 1 inch there. The cement is injected down that straw, and then it's supposed to come back up the sides, and that is what you call full circulation. So that there's a gasket, the cement is a gasket. Now, if your sink started leaking, would you coat the pipe in cement to keep it sealed? Probably wouldn't. Any of you guys work, or gals work with cement? It's really ornery. It's hard. It cracks a lot. You look at any sidewalk, you're going to see cracks in it. So this job of cementing is, it's an engineering impossibility to get it to serve perfectly. And the best the oil and gas industry can do, according to their own documents, is create the breakdown rate of 5% immediately upon drilling, and then up to 50 or 60% over a 30-year period. Because cement, as you know, breaks down. Now, in a lot of states, they don't require operators to cement the entire distance. And this is a huge problem. In Pennsylvania and Texas, I don't know in Ohio, maybe somebody here knows, they're only required to cement through the aquifer, which is a problem, because then you have all this open space down below, and if your, borehole intersects with the natural fracture, and you haven't cemented over here, you've got a conduit for oil and gas to go all different directions. And a lot of these cementing failures are the reason for the gas migration and other things to migrate. And if you notice in that PowerPoint slide from Society of Petroleum Engineers that we put up, which shows that 35% of current oil and gas wells, or 1.8 million gas wells in the world, are leaking, it says down in the PowerPoint, oh, and by the way, the public is becoming increasingly aware of zonal isolation problems. Meaning, they know that these wells are leaking. And then the next thing it says is, fixing this problem will require a, quote, push in technology. Meaning, they don't know how to solve it. The most scary part of that to me, though, is that it says we're going to drill more wells in the next 100 years than we will, than we have, in the next 10 years than we have in the last 100 years. Ohio, Western PA, West Virginia, you guys are seriously in the target zone for that, because not just gas comes up, but also oil. This is, an incredible crisis in this part of the world. That Western PA, west of the Appalachian Ridge, this is where they're really targeting people right now. And I'm assuming that cementing practices here are not better than what physics allows.
That's correct.
I'm just letting the microphone people pick the questions, if that's all right. So where are the microphone people? Can you raise your hands? Because you're getting to them. So just when you raise your hand and look at that, that'll be more effective.
Okay, question. It would seem to me the Achilles heel of fracking is the disposal of wastewater. So it would seem that the emphasis should be on making it, if not impossible, so expensive to dump wastewater that we sneak up and cancel fracking through that method.
This is an extremely important point, and I'd like Allison, if you want to just answer some of this, because I know you're planning on doing a wastewater injection well forum in 2 weeks or in a week.
On Thursday. So there is actually going to be an entire.
Hold on. But before I tell you, in Pennsylvania there are, I think, no injection wells. So you're getting all. They're coming to Ohio, and what we just found is that there was radioactive wastewater in Pennsylvania streams that was obviously being dumped illegally. Pittsburgh's public drinking water supply had to get shut down for 3 months because they were putting that waste into water treatment facilities that were not adequate, and it was going into the Monongahela River, and that was creating a situation where total dissolved solids were off the charts. Pittsburgh went on a bottled water advisory. People like the city council of Pittsburgh and Doug Shields found out about this. They banned fracking in Pittsburgh, and as a result, instead of cutting the industry in PA, they just brought all our waste here to Ohio. And those injection wells in Ohio are suffering the same cement problems, if not more, and leaking as intensely. I've seen pictures of this from people in Ohio where you have a toxic pool surrounding a wastewater injection facility. By the way, injecting waste into the ground is a really bad idea for all sorts of reasons. They leak, they're drilling through aquifers, they're not maintained, there's really not the same profit margin that you have from some of these gas wells. And I just also, on another extraordinarily disturbing tip, I just met a guy in New Orleans who was an ocean acoustic monitoring guy. And he told me some fascinating things about the Arctic, about how the Arctic underwater from a sound perspective was like an Amazonian rainforest because there was so much activity of whales and dolphins and things that were, he's played me some of the sounds, which was spectacular. But what he also said was, oh, and by the way, there are cold water seeps that come out from the continent into the ocean. And this might not be an issue with Ohio and the ocean, it might be an issue with Ohio and here. But there is communication between groundwater aquifers and the ocean. So if you're injecting waste and you don't think it's going to come back up on land, it might be coming back out into the ocean. This was something he was extremely concerned with. It's a bit of a tangential story, but the principle of taking all our chemical waste, and so much of this is oil and gas waste, some of it's radioactive, and just thinking that we're going to sweep it under the rug. You know, I've seen people showing injection well statistics with a total vertical depth of 500 feet above the aquifer, below the aquifer. This is nothing. And this water can migrate. So I'm going to hand it over to Allison to tell you a little bit more.
Yeah, so as many of you probably know or have heard from West Shore Fact, statewide we're working with Ban Injection Wells Coalition to stop the injection wells here in Ohio. If you look at where shale is all over the country, there is in each of the areas where shale is being drilled, there is a regional dumping ground. Here it's Ohio. So more than half of the waste that we're getting here in Ohio is coming from Pennsylvania and West Virginia. It's about 56% of the waste. Last year we injected nearly 600 million gallons of waste. And our governor has told us that he's very concerned about this. He doesn't like being seen as the dumping ground for the oil and gas industry, but he's trying to figure out what he can do about it and not violate the Interstate Commerce Clause. So that's a really fancy way to say I'm making an excuse, and it's not a really valid excuse because Connecticut banned injection wells. There's no problem with their ban on injection wells. And not only did Connecticut ban injection wells, but Governor Kasich himself issued an executive order stopping new permits for injection wells when one caused earthquakes in Youngstown. So he clearly has the authority to do it. He could stop the injection wells. As many of you made the call earlier to Governor Kasich's office, no, we did a big call and date to him today, and tomorrow we're going to be delivering a letter at a press conference in front of the governor's office with a gigantic toilet that we call the Travelin' John. So hopefully there'll be some news coverage of that tomorrow. But we're going to call out his excuse, and then we're going to take the Travelin' John to the big industry conference that they're having in Canton, which the mayor dubbed the Utica capital. It used to be the Football Hall of Fame capital. Now it's the Utica capital, dubbed by the mayor. But we're going to take it to the big industry conference up there and call out the waste issue as well, because they all want us to talk about jobs and energy independence, and there are some really dirty secrets that need to be uncovered. So we're working to do that.
Thank you. So that's a great answer. You have an immediate action point. And of course, you know a bit about injection wells and earthquakes from the film, and I encourage you to go and study that more because it's very, very direct. Okay. One guy. Oh, sorry. Okay, first.
What do you think is the most positive development you've seen in the last year or so as far as the fracking activism is concerned? Because it seems like it's very much burgeoning in a million different ways. I know native First Nation people in Brunswick have held off the frackers. You have huge demonstrations in Romania. It seems to be getting to be an international thing. I just wonder looking at the movement, what do you think is one of the most positive developments lately?
Well, that's a great question. I don't see anything but positive developments so far. There are moments well, actually, I can't really say that's true. There are times when, I would have to say this, that the insistence on a ban for fracking is clearly becoming the most passionate and most popular and widely held position. And that is unifying people in a way that I think is very powerful. I remember early on in New York when we had a lot of different groups who were just starting, and there's an anti-fracking organization in every tiny little town all along the southern tier of New York, and everybody had a different opinion. And people were saying, oh, we should go for regulations. Oh, no, we want to ban the New York City watershed. Oh, but then we're attacking each other and everybody was fighting. And, I went to Michael Brune as a representative of the Atlantic chapter of the Sierra Club and handed him a letter that demanded that he endorse the ban fracking approach in New York State. And Roger Downs, the Sierra Club member there, was allowed to go ahead and pursue that objective. The more pressure, and the big problem is that right now a lot of the big green groups, with the exception of Food and Water Watch, are out of sync with what the public really wants, and the public wants a ban. Because as well as I have been watching this film, a regulated new gas well doesn't help you. Regulations become permission. Regulations become a way that the oil and gas industry goes, oh, well, we're going to abide by these, but we're not really going to. And when the fine comes, we probably won't even have to pay it. And if we do have to pay it, it's going to be a tiny little fine. So the truth is people are figuring that out. And what we have to do is, there's this new environmental movement that's happening as a result of all the impacts of the extreme energy fracking, tar sands, mountaintop removal, the Keystone XL pipeline protests, all of these, and then climate. All of these strands are coming together, communicating, and realizing what this is a reaction to the oil and gas industry pursuing these extreme energy techniques. That it's no longer conventional oil and gas development, it's extreme energy, which is more toxic, more destructive, more treating you as expendable costs of business. And that the right reaction is to say we're going to ban it. The ban was just upheld in France, that they fought for in their constitutional court. It is now going to last at least 5 years. The Netherlands just banned fracking. There are 5 ballot initiatives in Colorado to ban fracking. 62% of people in Pennsylvania support a moratorium on fracking. New York still has no fracking. So I think that this, and Californians against fracking united 100,000 signatures on a petition to Governor Brown in the beginning of the spring to ban fracking. So that position has really, I think, bound a lot of people together and has put pressure on those who would make excuses for, apologize for, and allow for this to continue to happen. Because really what's simple is this. You're either against fracking or the choice is coming down to, do we want another 5 decades of fossil fuels or do we not? Do we want to go in a different direction? Or do we want an infrastructure that's going to get built, 1 to 2 million new wells in the United States alone, drilling all across the world, increasing climate temperatures, or do we want to move in a different direction? And one of the key fronts in that is to ban fracking and say, we're done with this. The oil and gas industry has had all the money and all the time, and they still can't come up with a coherent program that is safe for people. So time's up. Bye, class. Does anybody in the class have a question before you leave?
She does.
Okay, she's got a question.
I have a question because earlier we saw a bunch of the people were drinking bottled water. I know it may not be your exact expertise, but would you say the bottled water, companies are making a lot of profit off of this fracking?
Well, bottled water is a really bad idea. it really makes me sad every time I see bottled water as a person who has private water well in Pennsylvania, or as a consumer of the amazing tap water of New York City. When I see bottled water, I know that public drinking water standards are higher than the bottled water standards. And that you need, I think, something like 100 bottles of water to make one of the bottles. So you're making all this plastic waste in the world. I know that we have more plastic right now in the Pacific Ocean than we do phytoplankton, which is a huge, huge problem, and it's dissolving. It's on a molecular level. So all the plastic that we're using, which is an oil and gas product, is changing the composition of the oceans in very dangerous ways. Bottled water drives me crazy. It doesn't, you know, but this is why it's so important to protect groundwater. And this is why it's so important that the municipal sources of water are also clean and maintain the standards of being tested. What's really worrisome to me is, you know, we supposedly have really good standards for our municipal water supply, our reservoirs. But now I know, are these guys testing for this kind of thing? That is a new infusion of waste that's going all across the United States? Are they testing for fracking chemicals in the public water supply here, even though when we know that there's injection going on, when we know that wastewater is being dumped willy-nilly onto roads, behind places, in streams? What's the answer to that question? And are we now going to have to test municipal water supplies for other kinds of wastes that we haven't been done before? So, you know, as of previous to this, tap water standards are much higher than bottled water. In fact, I was on an episode of that program, The Doctors. You ever watch The Doctors? It was like a daytime program. I never heard of it. But I was on it. And they were testing all these bottled waters and then comparing it to the tap water in New York City. And they found that the tap water was way, way, way better. And that in one of the bottled water, the most fancy kind, the Fiji kind, that was really expensive, was a pathogen that was so high that the tester wouldn't drink it. And that the one that you got in the jug, the big gallon one, the distilled water, which was like 50 cents, didn't test it actually the best. Now, that's not scientific. I wouldn't suggest you go out there and be like, oh my God, I'm going to drink water. But it's true. Our public drinking water is so important. And if we think bottled water is better, that's just because an advertising person said that to you. It's just because it was on a billboard somewhere, or they put it in, you know, in vogue. Tap water is a much higher standard.
I was going to say, we actually have a Take Back the Tap program as well. So if you were to college and you're interested in
Take Back the Tap from Food and Water Watch. There is a Food and Water Watch Take Back the Tap program.
Yeah.
How
So
do
if
we
you're,
sign up for it?
you can contact me.
Go talk to her. Thank you. That's a great question.
Talking about plastic leads me into thinking about PVC pipes. Why can't they use those instead of cement? And would the chemicals eat away at the PVC pipes?
Well, the steel pipe that's in the gas well, you know, I don't know the answer to the question. I would imagine that when you're pushing, first of all, you're pushing through all this rock with that drill bit. But I don't believe that there's a use for PVC. I don't think that would be better. It would deteriorate probably way faster than steel. By the way, one thing that you probably don't think about is that when you build a windmill, you have a huge amount of steel, right? It's above ground and it's recyclable. When you build a gas well, you're doing a steel pipe that's 2 miles long and it's sequestered in the ground pretty much forever. You're taking an incredible amount of energy and natural resource, which is steel, right? This is a steel producing region, or it was. And you're just putting that in the ground and leaving it. I think Tony and Graffy did some calculations on this, that in New York alone it was like more than the entire US Navy. I don't know, that's a bad statistic, but just to put it in perspective, he measured all the steel that they were using, putting down those wells, and that you can't get back out again.
Before next question, I just want to make sure everyone in the audience knows that next week, which is going to be the last program of this fracking series, we have Teresa Mills from Food and Water Watch coming to do a presentation on injection wells and the campaign to ban them. So we hope you can show up for that. Again, it's Thursday, same time, Thursday at 7 p.m.
Yes, and the petitions that are outside about the banning both the Cuyahoga County, City of Cleveland, and for the state of Ohio. So please sign those things before you go.
Yes, my biggest concern is about the stealing of the trillions of gallons of water that they need in order to make this mash that they then poison and put back into the soil. And I think until they figure out a way to cook rice without water, they should not be doing fracking.
Well, you know, this is a great point. When you use water for a golf course, it's going into the surface, it's evaporating, it's part of the hydrologic cycle, it's still available later. When you do water for fracking, and you inject that into the ground, 8,000 feet down, 50% of that water doesn't come back up. It's permanently lost to the hydrologic cycle. It's just gone. It's stuck, infused in the rock. When they turn off those pressure valves, a lot of those fractures collapse, it gets stuck in them, infused into those layers of rock. And it's removed permanently from the hydrologic cycle. When you inject it into an injection well, same thing. At least you hope, right? Because if it's coming back up and getting back into the cycle underground, you don't want that. So you're not, this was a huge problem in Texas. The oil and gas industry was using more water than the other agricultural uses, and they were facing water bankruptcy. Towns were just running dry, and the oil and gas industry was buying water and farmers couldn't afford it. And the oil and gas industry came back and they said, oh, but we only use 1% of all the water in the entire state. It's all right, well, you're using 1%. You lose 50% of it more every time. So by the end of 15 years, you've now permanently removed 7% of the state's water. Because it's just gone. It's out of that hydrological cycle. It's down injection wells were trapped in the formation. So when they come back and they say, oh, but we use way less water than a golf course, you tell them that, no, it's not, that's not the way it works. The way it works is you are actually permanently removing half or more than half of the water that you use every year. That means you're going to be depriving the whole state of water, or the town in some cases by much more than 7%.
Josh, could you talk a little bit more? I know you addressed it in your Proust film, the Hilliard loophole, because I think that's a real key area that people need to hear about, number one, because that really opened the door once the industry was ready to go, almost a decade ago.
The Hilliard loophole. And what the gentleman is referring to is what's called the Halliburton loophole. It's the exemption to the Safe Drinking Water Act that is explicitly for hydraulic fracturing. This was a project of the Bush-Cheney government. They tried to do it for many, many years. In 2005, they won back majority control of the House and Senate, so they're able to pass this. It's an explicit exemption to the Safe Drinking Water Act for hydraulic fracturing. It's one page out of the 1,000-page bill, the Energy Policy Act of 2005. We do talk about it more in GASLAND, so if you haven't seen GASLAND, this is in there. It would take an act of Congress to reverse that exemption, and that act of Congress has not yet come. One more reason to get rid of every Republican lawmaker in Washington right now. They're the ones who are never going to vote for the FRAC Act. The Democrats are hard enough to convince. But if you don't have at least the majority of Democrats looking at the FRAC Act, which would reverse the exemption, there's no chance. If the Republicans are in control of either chamber, there's just no chance for that to be reversed. Now, what that means is that if the oil and gas industry is injecting material 500 feet from your house, and in a well, it might be sneaking underneath your house, none of that material has to be reported to the EPA, doesn't have to be reported to the state, doesn't have to be reported to you. So if, for example, like the Hallowich family in Pennsylvania who carved the words GASLAND into their lawn, they come up with something called acrylonitrile in their water. Or John Fenton, glycol compounds that they had. In both cases, the oil and gas industry came back and said, we didn't use that there, we used something else. And there's no record. There's no chain of liability. They're exempt from the reporting requirements. So you then have to go back and somehow prove a pathway, which is a hell of a lot more complicated. A lot more complicated. And that's what EPA did in the case of John Fenton. And by the way, they also did it in the case of the Halowiches. However, Halowich's case was completely sealed for a year and a half because Steph Halowich and her family signed a non-disclosure agreement in order to get out of their area because they needed to have some money to be able to move. Now, that non-disclosure agreement was opened up by the court because the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette sued the court to open up the record saying it was a matter of public health and safety. When they found this out, guess what else they found out? They found out that the Halowich children, who I think were like 6 and 8 at the time, were gagged for life. That they were not going to be able to speak about anything related to fracking of oil and gas for their entire lives in that agreement. I mean, so, then another person who I know, who I can't speak about, because there were many, many, many people in both of those films who have had to sign non-disclosure agreements and, you know, are not allowed to speak. But what one of those people said to me was, oh, and by the way, if I was an oil and gas company, what I would do would be silence future generations. And then if I was a family negotiating that contract, I would try to negotiate back from, say, the 3rd generation now. Of the unborn. Right? So, if you can imagine having to sign away your great-grandkids who are not born yet, their rights to speak, then you can approach how much the oil and gas industry wants to keep those secrets buried.
So that leads me to 2 questions. When you were arrested, did they charge you with contempt of Congress, and how did that turn out?
No, I wasn't in contempt of Congress. I actually was very quiet, and the only thing I said was, this is the public, what I say in the public. Yeah. The case was dismissed. It was, the charge was unlawful entry into a public domain. So, and what that meant was unlawful entry of a camera. They actually didn't arrest the camera. And, you know, I was released within 2 hours, but it seems like you have another question.
The other question is that the environmental movement has put a lot of pressure on the Obama administration to deny the XL pipeline permit. And has that had any spillover effect on his thinking about natural gas?
Clearly not. The Obama administration is, to me, in a massive neglected responsibility right now on this issue. It's incredibly disheartening. It's incredibly disappointing. I think it damages his ethical standing and his character enormously. This is a president who was elected by a grassroots movement, who is currently ignoring the largest environmental grassroots movement to be assembled in decades. And it is unconscionable. The first film, you notice, is all about Dick Cheney. This film is, and this crisis, 5 years into his presidency, is squarely on his shoulder. His legacy, you know, these chemicals that are being injected here on your public lands, and they have, they have Barack Obama's initials on them, in my opinion. And I feel like this. I campaigned for Barack Obama from 2008, and I wanted to win this time around. I agree with most of his policies, and it doesn't really matter because we also have people in the Tea Party who are fighting fracking, and you see Calvin Tillman in the film saying, "I was a Republican, now I'm an independent." We've got Tea Partiers and green, you know, tree huggers working together in Pennsylvania to make green tea. You know, there's a lot of like, seriously. there's a lot of conversation going on between those factions, right? People who are there because of land rights, Marcellus patriots for land rights, and, you know, the tree huggers who are linking arms to fight off fracking. So it's not just a progressive issue. I am a supporter of Obama in almost every other capacity, right? Except for perhaps NSA. And a bunch of other things. So what I'm saying is that it's very hard for me to say that. It's very hard for me to say, listen, I don't need you to just reject the peace from XL. I don't need you to just ban fracking. I need you to campaign for us the way we campaign for you. I need you to go door to door and stop these multinational corporations from harming people's human rights in America. In the same way that I went door to door and talked to my neighbors. That's what I want you to do. I want you to knock on all your neighbors' doors in Congress and tell them, hey, very explicitly, let's take the press corps along with us. Let's see the president lobbying Congress about protecting Americans against oil and gas drilling that is harming their human rights, that is harming their civil rights, that is destroying their communities. Instead of going out there and saying absurdities like, you know, we have 600,000 jobs from natural gas industry. It is absolutely not true. Food and Water Watch proved it. And to go out there and to put your own character as President of the United States, your own legacy on the line, to defend this, when what we know we have is renewable energy, I'm sorry, I gave kind of work up. But when we know we have renewable energy technology that can be used for all purposes, and we should be marching as fast as possible in that direction, when you have that responsibility and that power, I think it's his obligation to go ahead and use it. I want to see him campaigning for us. And then I will be satisfied.
Have you written to him?
Oh, yes. We've written to him. And we went on every channel, I went on every channel in the United States asking for a meeting between the president and the people in this film, and the engineers and scientists in this film. You know, because I felt like if you're going to meet with the natural gas industry, it's fair that you meet with the people in this film who are representative of all these people in this room, of people, thousands of people across America who are suffering these issues. Whether they're at the first stage where you're just freaking out because you're super stressed that you could lose everything, or you're down the line and your house might explode. You know, or you've had health problems because of chemical exposure from volatile organic solids. You know, so we said, meet with these people. These are your constituents. And they turned 7. And what I'm asking people to do is to turn up because it's not just about watching films and asking questions and having meetings. You've got to be in the streets. You've got to turn out in the streets. If this many people found a way, with your diversity of age, range, and social background and everything that's happening here, walked in to the governor's office and demanded a meeting, you'd get on the meeting. You'd make this an issue. And what I'm asking for is sign up with us, sign up with Food and Water Watch. I really expect there to be a protest of some kind that's passionate and out there when they decide to try to open up Illinois, which is Obama's home state. I'd like to see what happens. That we can say, I want a bus from every single state in the union to go there and make a very pointed message to this president. When you can be in your home state's backyard, we're going to make this a national issue. We're already doing that, but I'm announcing this 6 months off because I think that if we had 10,000 or 20,000 people there saying, no, we're not letting these rigs in, there'd be no way that they could stop us. I really honestly believe that. And I think that if we could, all of us from New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, because people, you know, in Texas, and in Colorado or in Wyoming don't have that kind of power on their own. But if we make a stand, I think we should do it in Obama's backyard and draw him into this conversation.
How much do we have to worry about Lake Erie as a consequence of fracking and deep injection wells?
The what?
Lake Erie. How much do we have to worry about?
I'm not even here to ask that question. I wish I knew.
I can answer that.
Okay.
So, my name is Nikki Antonio, and I'm a state representative. And the governor right now has just a stay on Lake Erie and drilling under Lake Erie. I introduced a bill to ban drilling under Lake Erie. We got only as far as the first hearing and nowhere else.
And who are you?
I'm a state representative for House District 13.
Awesome.
Great.
And what's your name?
things that we did with GASLAND 1 was we held sessions all around my district and a couple other legislators, getting people to come, because this was last year before this was really an issue in Ohio, but it's a huge issue in Ohio now. There are people in suburban enclaves, some of which are in this room, who have gas wells behind their homes. You see deer, I went out and saw some of these in Broadview Heights and communities that never thought they'd see a gas well in their backyard. And so this is very timely, it's very critical for Ohio. And I don't want to take the stage away, but I do want to say that I'm very concerned about Lake Erie. Not just the drilling, but also the millions and millions of gallons of water that they've also been allowed to take out. The same thing you were talking about with the rivers, they're doing with Lake Erie.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Thank you so much for chiming in. That's always amazing. Or at least one. Are there any others? Elected officials in the House?
Any ones?
All right. Well, now thank you.
Hey, I live in Columbus, and I've been talking with legislators all year about fracking. There's 2,000 people that have signed a ban. We, the people of Ohio, ban fracking. And but right now we have a big problem with frack drilling cuttings. What they're doing, where they're putting it in landfills. And in Columbus, there's not been any injection wells or any drilling in Columbus. So people in Central Ohio, Columbus area, have been pretty oblivious. But now there's a landfill that they're processing this frack waste. Do you know much about the radioactivity of Marcellus shale drillings?
Yeah. Well, it's been shown that there's radioactive waste going into landfills in New York from PA. The Marcellus shale itself is radioactive. It varies in radioactivity in different parts of it. So there's testing going on right now to take a look at it. My mom is actually working on this in a big way. Do you have your phone?
Yeah.
Let's call my mom. It's your birthday. Can you sing my mom happy birthday? It's my mom's 72nd birthday. She's like, you're in Ohio! Okay, I remember her number. Whoops. My mom's name is Angela. We're going to call her, we're going to sing her happy birthday. And then we're going to ask her this question, because she knows more about this than I do. But the Marcellus shale is radioactive. And there's a grave concern in New York City that radioactive gas can increase lung cancer rates, because radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer. Hey, Mom? I know you're probably sleeping or something, but I'm in Ohio, and there's all these people here, and they're going to sing you happy birthday. Her name is Angela. I also have a question for you, but here you go. Can we sing happy birthday to my mom? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Angela. Happy birthday to you. Take a bow. That's not the real, I know you're feeling really nice right now, but that's not the real reason I called you. Because the question was about radioactive drill cuttings, and I said, you know, that my mom was working on radioactivity a lot more than I was. And the question is, you know, about radon and radium. Is there like a sound bite you could give us on radioactive drill cuttings and the radon in the gas?
Well, the radon in the gas, the problem with the radon in the gas that we're having in New York is that Thanks, Mom. Well, I think everybody here really appreciates your answer and hope you had a good... This was about 100 people singing you happy birthday, so. And they're all going to friend you on Facebook. All right. Bye, Mom.
So did you understand the answer? In all of natural gas has some radon in it. If you get it from the Gulf, it's a very low level, and it's 8-10 days away from you, right? Because it takes that long to pour up a pipeline towards your house in Long Island, in Pennsylvania, New York, whatever. But if the gas is coming from like a day away, and it's a much higher level of radiation, which in the Marcellus Shale we're seeing 30 times the level that you might have in other natural gas, then the half-life doesn't deteriorate in time in your kitchen, and if you're having radon, a possibility of radon piling up in your kitchen. For the radioactive wastes, we know this has been happening in New York. There's a lot of reporting on this. Shale Shock, which is a great organization, Indica, Shale Shock Media, they've done some reporting on this also. I don't have some of those facts in my fingertips, but clearly Mom is up late thinking about radon on her birthday. But I'm sure that made her really happy, so thanks for that. Let's take maybe 2 more questions if that's all right, or 3 if we, if that's okay. Oh, one over there, okay.
You touched on the human rights issue, and because I think this is a human rights issue, and that corporations are not people, and they do not have rights, they have privileges that are granted by people. And so I'd like, would you comment on CELDF, the Community Environmental
Yes.
Fund?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. My favorite saying is that, the only way I'll believe that corporations are people is if Texas executes one. Not my joke. I'm just transmitting the joke. Some people. Yes. CELDF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. Isn't that right? They're amazing. They wrote the ordinance that banned fracking in Pittsburgh. They wrote ordinances that have been used throughout New York State and Pennsylvania and a lot of other places based on human rights, based on your right as a municipality to ban this activity. You can go and argue that in your court system and to your legislators, your municipal legislators. And the CELDF bans have worked and held in a lot of places. And these court cases you may have heard about in upstate New York, the town of Dryden, where the oil and gas industry sued the town for banning fracking. The town won twice. So these are very strong legal arguments based on human rights. And the website is CELDF, or at CELDF.org, I think. And do you have CELDF representatives working here now? Who's working with you?
We have one.
Yeah. They are amazing. She was here. She was here. She left when I called my mom. She was like, this is just getting ridiculous. I'm calling my sister next. And she's in England. It's going to be like 4 in the morning. But no, like what I'm saying is that these are very strong ordinances, and for a municipality, right, for a local place that has very little chance of convincing your governor, it's a strong option. And if you can string together a lot of these bans, you start to X off turf, right? And I really believe in it because it's something you can really campaign for. But as long as you do know this, the good news that I want to tell you is 8 days after this film came out, my entire county, 100,000 acres of leases from Chesapeake, Newfield, and Hess were canceled. They walked away. They left town. We won that. But I know that the river basin is not protected until the next county is protected, and I know the river basin is not protected until we start to defeat the effects of climate change. Because in 20 years, I could lose everything I love about the river basin to climate change. It's
you know, we had Irene come through, and you saw in the film that incredible carnage of the trees. We know the woolly adelgid is marching up the East Coast, which eats our hemlocks. It's a bug that likes warmer temperatures. The incidences of Lyme disease, just anecdotally, in my general store, are going way up. These bugs are overwintering and multiplying in ways that we haven't seen before. So we know that climate change is a huge threat. So even if you do get your town banned, you can't just sit back and go, all right, we're cool. You still have to engage in that fight statewide. You still have to engage in that fight to ban fracking. So I think that the cell-death ordinance can work, but let it also work to really fire you up to start campaigning for human rights. Because once you're involved in this campaign, even if you win, it's what makes life meaningful. We're here to talk about, right at the end of the film, this is not about any one place. This is about a much bigger vision for the future that the oil and gas industry is trying to foist on you. And it's all of our responsibility. We're all a member of a frontline community. If we're in the frack target zone or not. Sorry, who's got the mic? Let's take just 2 more questions. I feel like that's good, right? CELDF, CELDF.org.
Okay. Can you say something about it being beyond human rights, like maybe the rights of the planet, the rights of animals, I mean, all of you?
The question is going to say something about it being beyond human rights. We often think of the human rights perspective as the pinnacle of what we're talking about here, right? In America, we trade our environment for $1, and we don't have a moral crisis because of that. But we still don't feel comfortable about trading someone's human rights for $1. We still don't want to abuse someone's human rights and make money off of that. But what you're saying, I think, makes a lot of sense. That when this destruction happens, it destroys things that are not possible for humans to make over again. You know, it's like John Fenton says in the first film, it's amazing what a piece of heavy machinery can destroy in a few hours what took Mother Nature millions of years to create. I was just looking, I'm speaking tomorrow night at Pittsburgh Power Shift, and I was looking at this particular statistic that the International Panel on Climate Change predicts somewhere between 1/4 and 30% of all species, plant and animal species, will die if we hit 2 degrees of warming. And we're on track with current emissions to hit 2 degrees of warming by 2042. This is a lot of goodbyes. And I always think about it, I can see how profoundly you're thinking about this. Right? Are we thinking profoundly enough about this? You know? And it's overwhelming. And it can be extraordinarily depressing and immobilizing to a certain degree. The trick is to somehow turn yourself around and make you more active. And to make you active in a way that is a little bit more uncompromising, a little bit more passionate, a little bit less self-motivated. Because this is so interesting, right? The fracking movement is so strong because it's invading so many places. It's not because we're all deeply compassionate human beings. It's because all of our butts are on the line, and we are combining with other people whose butts are on the line. You know? And I think from this perspective, it has to be engaged much more. That we have to, within this, develop a sense of values that really goes deeply into the question and says, you know, that is what we do know we have, even if we have 1 million species go extinct in 30 years. We still have to build a movement that is based on values, and based on compassion, and based on generosity, and based on integrity, and based on honesty, and based on neighbors. Because it's really a movement of neighbors. Right? I mean, I don't know how many of you are neighbors, but I got to know all my neighbors in Upper Delaware, and you get to know your neighbors when this starts to come into town, right? And that's community, and that's a value structure. So when we think about this, I think that the antidote to this massive, horrible, depressive thought is that as we go forward, you have to build things that are going to be permanent, and the things that are permanent are your relationships in your community, and how strong can you make that, and how much can we base that on compassion, on the rights of nature, on the rights of animals, on the rights of people, all as one interdependent system. At least that's I think a lot about this, so it's very hard for me to articulate it in a succinct way, but it is a very deep and intense and profound question that I don't think anyone really has the answer to, but it's a really, I think, good question to think about.
I want to remind everybody to come next Thursday when Teresa Mills will be here talking about the injection well problem. And she's a fantastic activist about this. She's so high up about injection wells, so I hope you'll come back. A friend of mine said, you know, we ought to all put it on a t-shirt that says, you can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to show up.
I think it's a great way to end. And thank you all for showing up. Check out
I say Gene and then they write Jane. We are really proud of it.
Hey, I have a very quick
Oh, that's okay.
Thank you. Very quick loaded question. Okay. All right. If we're able to, by our vote, overcome this negative part of Congress, right? You think we can override this? Considering that corporations are people, overriding that. Can we override? You know what I mean?
First order of business to get money out of politics.
It doesn't matter about the money.